Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? That question had followed Anna Morgan for most of her career, not as a complaint but as a fact. She learned early that silence was a form of camouflage, and camouflage, when mastered, could move you through any battlefield, even the kind that served whiskey instead of war. The bar smelled like old salt and burnt oil, a place near Coronado where the walls had heard too many stories and kept everyone. The laughter, the bravado, the noise, it was a familiar kind of battlefield. Different uniforms, same energy, same need to prove something. Anna sat alone at the end of a table that wasn't really hers. The condensation on her glass traced a crooked path down the rim, and she followed it with her eyes. She wasn't here to drink. She never really was. She came here for the background noise, something to drown the quiet that still lived inside her after too many deployments, too many missions that ended in dust and silence. A voice broke through the noise, slurred, sharp, looking for attention. "Hey, sweetheart, that seat, for real soldiers." The laughter that followed was lazy, uncertain, the kind that waits for permission to be cruel. Anna didn't move. She kept her eyes down, shoulders slightly forward, every part of her posture whispering, "Not worth your time." But that only made it worse. The man who'd spoken, Rico, someone said his name, was stepped closer. Big guy, too young to be bitter, too arrogant to be wise. The kind of man who'd seen just enough of life to think he understood it. He leaned over the table, hands planted near her drink, breath heavy with beer and insecurity. "I said this table's taken, for men." Still, she didn't respond. And somewhere near the bar, an older man lifted his head, gray hair, weathered eyes. Commander Jansen, retired now, but his gaze was still sharp enough to cut through lies and noise. He'd seen that posture before, that stillness. It wasn't weakness, it was calculation. The young men around Rico didn't see it. They saw a quiet woman, plain clothes, no makeup, no rank showing. They saw someone easy to humiliate. But Jansen saw the way she shifted her weight without moving her feet, the way her right hand rested just close enough to center gravity. A fighter's stillness. The kind that comes after years of turning chaos into muscle memory. Rico smirked, emboldened by the silence around him. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue." He flicked his fingers near her face, expecting a flinch, some proof of fear. "Nothing." It was the kind of silence that makes noise uncomfortable, the kind that demands the next move. When she finally looked up, her eyes weren't angry. They were empty, a calm gray that absorbed light instead of reflecting it, the kind of eyes that didn't see the man in front of her, only his stance, his shoulders, his balance. Data points, threat vectors. It wasn't personal, it was physics. Jansen set his glass down. He didn't intervene. Not yet. Some lessons, he thought, arrive only when the noise stops. Rico's friends started laughing again, louder now, because laughter was easier than confronting the quiet. One of them shouted, "Come on, man, she's not even worth it." But Rico wanted the win. He wanted to feel like the hero in front of his peers. And somewhere inside, Anna recognized the type. She'd seen him on bases, on missions, in training camps. The kind of man who thought dominance was proof of strength. The kind who never lasted long when bullets started speaking. When he struck, it wasn't a punch, not really. It was the kind of clumsy, angry push that a drunk gives when he's trying to make a point. His fist grazed her cheekbone, a dull impact. For a split second, everyone in the bar inhaled. And then physics took over. Anna moved with the strike, not away from it, through it. Her hips rotated just enough to absorb the energy, redirect it. It looked like nothing, a blink, a breath. But Jansen saw it the instant she entered flow state. Years of precision condensed into instinct. Her left hand caught Rico's wrist before he realized he'd missed. Her right foot stepped inside his balance line. Her elbow pressed softly, almost gently, against his. One motion, continuous, seamless. And then he was on the ground. No one saw how it happened. One second he was standing, the next he was kneeling, his arm locked, pain blooming across his body like fire. The bar froze. The jukebox stuttered to silence. Anna's voice, calm, almost detached, broke the stillness. "You're done." No anger, no triumph, just a statement of fact. Rico gasped, face pale, breath hitching as his body betrayed him. His friends stood still, unsure if they should move or apologize or vanish. Jansen exhaled slowly. The entire confrontation, from insult to submission, had lasted maybe 3 seconds. And then came the real silence, the kind that humbles a room. The bartender's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his phone, but Jansen raised a finger. "Don't," he said quietly. "Not yet." He walked forward, unhurried, respectful, and stopped a few feet from Anna. She had already released Rico and stepped back, giving him space to recover. Her breathing hadn't changed. Her pulse hadn't quickened. It was as if she just finished adjusting a loose bolt, not disarmed a man twice her size. "Ma'am," Jansen said softly, his voice just for her. "You all right?" She nodded once. "He's fine," she murmured. "Nothing broken." Her tone carried a strange mix of professionalism and distance. The kind of tone you use when your body has acted before your emotions catch up. The local police arrived minutes later, lights flashing through the window, breaking the heavy stillness with reality. They saw only the aftermath. A shaken man, a calm woman, a crowd too stunned to speak. "Step away from him, ma'am," one officer ordered, hand hovering near his sidearm. Jansen stepped forward, badge out. "Commander Jansen, U.S. Navy. This woman's under my observation." The officers hesitated, and she is. He looked at Anna for a long moment, something like pride or perhaps respect flickering in his eyes. "Run her name," he said quietly. "Anna Morgan." The officer tapped on his tablet, confusion turning slowly to disbelief. The words that followed changed the temperature of the room. "Naval Special Warfare Development Group," he read aloud. "SEAL Team 6, rank Chief Petty Officer, combat hours 2,000 plus, Navy Cross, Silver Star, multiple classified commendations." Every voice died. Even Rico, clutching his arm, stared up at her as if seeing her for the first time. The word SEAL seemed to echo in the silence, heavy as stone. Jansen straightened, then, in full view of everyone, brought his hand to his brow and saluted. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "it's an honor." Anna hesitated, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. She hated moments like this, the attention, the titles, the weight of other people's awe. She didn't see a hero in herself, just a professional who'd done what was necessary. The officers lowered their hands. Rico's friends backed away, shame painted across their faces. The bartender swallowed hard, his eyes wet with something between fear and reverence. Jansen's voice carried, calm and firm. "She's shown more restraint tonight than most of you will in a lifetime. You should be grateful that all she did was teach you physics." The bar exhaled as one. But Anna wasn't listening anymore. Her gaze had drifted toward the window, toward the dark Pacific beyond the base lights. The waves were moving like breath, steady, endless. She always felt drawn to them. Out there, everything made sense. The ocean was indifferent, honest, free of pretense. Behind her, whispers began, rumors forming before the truth could catch up. Some called her the ghost, others the quiet storm. She didn't care. She gathered her jacket, tossed a bill on the table, and walked out without looking back. Jansen watched her go. "She's still carrying it," he muttered under his breath. The bartender glanced over. "Carrying what?" Jansen's eyes stayed on the door. "Whatever she left behind over there." Outside, Anna walked along the boardwalk, the sea wind cutting through her sweater. Her cheeks still tingled faintly from the impact, a reminder that even ghosts could bleed. But her mind was elsewhere, far from Coronado, far from the laughter and shock behind her. She could still hear the echo of a different night, one filled with gunfire and sand and the metallic taste of survival. For years she trained her mind to stay silent, to move, not react, to breathe through pain and chaos until it passed. Tonight it had all come back, not through violence but through restraint. As she reached the edge of the pier, she stopped. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, black and endless. Somewhere out there, she thought, were the names she never said aloud, teammates who didn't come back, memories she refused to revisit. She closed her eyes and whispered to no one, "I didn't want this." The wind carried her words away, like confession into the dark. Behind her, the world would tell the story differently, about the woman who dropped a drunk Marine in a bar without breaking a sweat. They'd turn it into legend, simplify it, miss the point entirely. Because for Anna Morgan, it was never about winning. It was about not losing herself. And somewhere in the dark reflection of the water, her own face stared back, calm, unreadable, quietly breaking. She thought she'd left war behind. But some wars follow you home. The wind off the Pacific smelled of salt and jet fuel, the twin signatures of Coronado. Anna walked until the noise of the bar became a memory. Each step matched the rhythm of her breath, in, out, quiet, measured. That was the thing about training. It never left you, even when the uniform did. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She ignored it once, then again. Finally, on the third vibration, she stopped beneath a flickering streetlight and answered. "Morgan." The voice on the other end was deep, steady. "Chief, you still breathing?" It was Master Chief Wilkes, one of the old breed, a man who'd been more ghost than human long before she joined Team 6. "I'm fine," she said. "I heard about the bar," he replied. "Coronado doesn't keep secrets for long." She said nothing. "You didn't hurt him too bad." "No," she whispered, "just his pride." Wilkes chuckled, then fell silent. "They're calling you the ghost of the boardwalk. Thought you should know." "Let them talk." "Always do," he said. Then softer, "You doing all right, Anna, really?" She hesitated, the streetlight hummed. "I don't know," she admitted. "Feels like I never left over there." Wilkes exhaled. "Nobody really leaves, you just get better at pretending." The line went quiet. Then the old chief said something she didn't expect. "There's a memorial tomorrow. New names on the wall. Might be good to see a few faces that remember the right kind of noise." Anna nodded even though he couldn't see it. "I'll be there." When the call ended, she slipped the phone away and stared at the horizon. The ocean was a sheet of black glass, but in her mind it became desert again, hot wind, dust, the smell of oil and sweat. Memory doesn't need permission to return. She closed her eyes, and for a heartbeat she was back there, inside a dim compound somewhere in Helmand Province. A hostage rescue, night vision green, 3 heartbeats in her ear. Then the door exploded inward and everything went white. Her voice trembled. "Not tonight," she whispered. "Not again." She walked on. By the time she reached her small apartment overlooking the bay, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving only the ache beneath. The mirror by the door showed the bruise forming on her cheek, faint, already fatting. She stared at it, then at her eyes. No fear there, just fatigue. Her hands shook slightly as she made tea. She used to steady her aim with these same hands at 800 yards. Now they trembled from too many sleepless nights. She took a breath and forced the tremor still. Control. Always control. Outside, a police siren wailed briefly and cut off. Somewhere, Rico was probably telling his own version of the story, the one where he learned that arrogance bleeds too. She didn't hate him. Pity, maybe. Mostly she pitied the world that made men like him think they needed to roar to be seen. She sat on the couch, staring at the ocean through the open blinds. The base lights blinked in the distance, tiny reminders of an order she no longer belonged to. She'd thought leaving active duty would quiet her mind. It hadn't. The silence just gave her ghosts more room to speak. At 200 hours she finally slept, shallow, restless, the way soldiers do when they're used to alarms that never ring. The dream came again. She was running through dust and smoke. Someone was shouting her name. She turned, saw Petty Officer Reyes pinned under debris, blood everywhere. She reached for him, but the blast wave tore the world in half. Then silence. Always silence. She woke with a cry lodged halfway in her throat. The dawn light had just begun to seep through the blinds. She sat up, breath ragged, hand over her chest. "Reyes," she whispered. "I'm sorry." By morning she was back in motion, running the perimeter roads of the base, past the chain-link fences and the smell of diesel. Each step a ritual of penance. Sweat, breath, heartbeat. Keep moving, she told herself. If you stop, the past catches up. At the memorial, the crowd was small, veterans mostly, wives, kids too young to remember the faces on the wall. Anna kept to the back. She didn't wear her medals, just a plain black blouse and the quiet posture of someone who'd already said goodbye too many times. When the names were read, she closed her eyes. One name froze her where she stood. Petty Officer First Class Miguel Reyes. The words sliced clean through her. She stayed after the ceremony while others drifted away, their small talk floating in the breeze. She traced his name on the metal plate, her fingertip following the grooves. The metal was cold, the way it had been the night they pulled him out. She could still smell the sand, the cordite, the copper tang of blood. "Couldn't save you," she murmured, "but I never stopped trying." Behind her, footsteps approached. "Thought I'd find you here," said Wilkes. He stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "You still carrying that day, huh?" "I left part of me there," she said. "Everyone does," he replied. "Question is what you do with what's left." She looked at him. "What did you do?" He smiled without joy. "Tried to be useful. Sometimes that's enough." They stood there a long while in silence, two soldiers lost in the same storm. Later that night, Anna walked back toward the bar. Not to drink, to return something. The bartender looked up, nervous, as she entered. The chair she'd sat in was gone. In its place stood an empty space and a small brass plaque that read the professional's seat. She ran a finger across it, surprised. The bartender shrugged. "Seemed right," he said quietly. "Didn't want anyone else sitting there." She gave a faint smile. "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "People are still talking about you. Not the fight. The way you stayed calm, like you'd seen worse." "I have," she said softly, "and so have a lot of better people." She left the bar with that thought lingering, the weight of unseen stories that no one ever tells. On her way home, the streetlights flickered in the fog, and for the first time in months she felt something like release. Not peace, not yet, but the start of it. The war wasn't over. It just had a new front, the quiet battle inside. Part 3. Words. The letter arrived 3 days later. No return address. Just her name, handwritten in the precise block letters used by people who learned to write on military forms. She turned it over twice before opening it. The paper smelled faintly of gun oil and desert dust, a scent that shouldn't have crossed an ocean. Inside were 4 words. "He didn't die clean." Her chest tightened. For a long time she just stared at the sentence, the way one might stare at a live grenade. Then she read the second line, scrawled in smaller writing. "Meet me at Pier 7, 2300 hours. W." She knew that initial. W meant Wilkes, or it used to. At 2300 she stood beneath the rusted lamps of the old pier, wind tugging at her jacket. The waves below slapped the pylons with steady rhythm, like a heartbeat that wouldn't quit. She saw a silhouette approaching, tall, limping slightly. But as he stepped into the light, it was Wilkes. It was someone younger, a face she hadn't seen in years. "Dan Reyes," she breathed, "Miguel's younger brother." He looked older now, harder around the eyes. "Didn't think you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't." He handed her a small flash drive. "My brother kept copies of his helmet cam. The official report said everyone went down clean. But this," his voice cracked, "this says otherwise." She hesitated, the memory of that night roaring back. "You shouldn't have this." Maybe not, he said, but you should. Back in her apartment, she inserted the drive. The video opened to static, then the familiar grain of night vision green. She heard her own voice calm, issuing commands through the comms. Alpha in position. Bravo, move. Then came the chaos, flashes, shouting, gunfire. And then something she'd never heard before, a voice yelling over the comms that wasn't one of theirs. American accent, orders that contradicted hers. Abort the rescue, fall back, leave the secondary team. Her stomach turned. That order had cost Ray's his life. She paused the video, her hands shook. No, she whispered, that's impossible. She rewound, listened again. The same voice. She knew it now, Commander Hale, the mission lead. He'd been promoted since then, transferred to a desk job in D.C., hailed as a hero. The weight of betrayal settled heavy in her chest. For years, she'd carried guilt for a death that hadn't been her fault. And now she knew why the reports had vanished, why no one ever spoke of that mission again. She sat in the dark for hours, the video looping in silence. Every few minutes she whispered Miguel's name like a prayer. Then finally she said aloud, "He didn't die clean, and neither did I." The next morning she visited Wilkes. He was on the pier cleaning an old fishing reel. When she told him, his jaw tightened. "I warned you some ghosts don't stay buried," he muttered. "You knew." "I suspected," he admitted. "But orders are orders, and some truths burn everything they touch." Anna looked out at the water. "Then maybe it's time someone got burned." Wilkes shook his head. "Careful, Chief. The system protects its own." "So do I," she replied. For the first time he smiled. "That's the Anna I remember." Over the following days she made calls, quiet ones, to people who owed her favors. Files resurfaced. Mission logs, timestamps, transcripts. Every piece confirmed what she already knew. The extraction order that night had been falsified after the fact. Hale had sacrificed a team to secure his own promotion. She didn't want revenge. She wanted truth. But truth in their world was currency, and every coin cost blood. That night she drove to the edge of the naval base where the wind carried the sound of training drills. The gate guard recognized her immediately. "Evening, Chief," he said, surprised. "Didn't know you were back on rotation." "Just visiting," she said. Her tone left no room for questions. Inside the compound, she found Hale's office dark except for the glow of monitors. He looked older, softer, safe. She stood in the doorway until he noticed her. "Morgan," he said, startled, "what are you doing here?" "Finishing what you started." She placed the flash drive on his desk. "That's the unedited recording of Operation Sable. I sent copies to Internal Affairs and the press. They'll compare it to your official report." Hale's face drained of color. "You don't know what you're doing." "I do," she said quietly. "I'm remembering who we were supposed to be." He took a step toward her. "You'll ruin careers, reopen wounds." She met his eyes. Some wounds never closed. When she left, she felt no triumph. Only a deep, bone-tired calm, the kind that comes after years of silence, finally break. Outside, the dawn was beginning to rise, thin light spreading across the water. She breathed it in, slow, steady. Later that day, the news broke. An internal investigation into falsified mission reports. The story spread fast, faster than truth usually travels. She watched it unfold from her apartment, sipping cold coffee, expression unreadable. When Wilkes called, she answered on the first ring. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied. "I just stopped hiding." He was silent for a while, then, "You free tonight?" "Why?" "Because I think the world owes Miguel." Raise a toast. That evening they met again at the same bar, the plaque on the chair shining under the warm lights. No one bothered them. The bartender poured 2 glasses of whiskey and left the bottle. Wilkes raised his glass. "To the quiet ones," he said. Anna met his eyes. "To those who fought and never needed to shout." They drank in silence. the ocean wind slipping through the door like a hymn. For the first time in years, she felt the noise inside her head ease. Not gone, but gentler. Outside, the waves kept their rhythm, steady, patient, eternal. And somewhere far beyond the surf, the ghosts finally rested. The call came 2 days later. 3 words clipped and official. Report to command. Anna knew what that meant, not gratitude, not acknowledgement, just damage control. The world had already turned her act into headlines. Whistleblower SEAL exposes cover-up. They called her brave, reckless, insubordinate, depending on which outlet you read. But inside the Navy's walls, bravery wasn't the headline. It was betrayal. She entered the base through the side gate, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. The guards didn't salute, not out of disrespect, out of confusion. No one knew what she was now. A hero? A liability? Maybe both. Inside the administrative building, fluorescent lights hummed like insects. The air was sterile, recycled, cold. A young ensign escorted her down a hallway lined with photographs of smiling officers, polished ghosts who'd all once thought themselves untouchable. At the end waited Commander Hale. His uniform was crisp again, his demeanor calm, too calm. Behind him sat 3 others, legal, intelligence, public relations, a tribunal without the name. Chief Morgan, Hale said evenly, you've caused quite a storm. She stood at ease, spine straight. Truth tends to do that, sir. He smiled faintly, a predator's smile. You've broken chain of command, released classified data, and endangered active personnel. She met his gaze, and you left good men to die. The room tensed. The legal officer cleared his throat. Let's stay on record, Chief. You understand you're facing dishonorable discharge and potential federal charges under the UCMJ. Anna's voice didn't waver. Yes, sir. Do you regret your actions? The intelligence officer asked. She paused long enough for the silence to stretch. No, she said softly. I regret waiting this long. Hale leaned forward. You think you did the right thing, but you've crippled morale. You've tarnished the name of this unit. Anna's hands tightened behind her back. The name of this unit was tarnished the day we started lying to ourselves. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Hale sighed. Dismissed, Chief. You'll be contacted regarding your final review. She turned to go, but at the door she stopped. Her voice was quiet, but the steel in it carried across the room. You trained us to act with honor, sir. I just followed the lesson. The door closed behind her. Outside, the air felt heavier, like the weight of truth itself. She walked to the lot, eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. Old instincts, always checking exits, shadows, unknown vehicles. The habits of someone who'd spent too many years hunted by both enemies and silence. That evening, Wilkes called again. How bad? Could be worse, she said. They didn't arrest me. They won't. You're too public now. But they'll bleed you out in paperwork and hearings. She gave a small laugh. I've survived worse than bureaucracy. Maybe, Wilkes replied. But this fight's different. No cover fire, no brothers on your flank. She didn't answer because he was right. Weeks passed. The story faded from headlines, replaced by new wars, new scandals. But inside the community, whispers lingered. Some called her a traitor. Others called her a savior. Most just called her gone. Then one morning, an unmarked envelope slid under her apartment door. No name, just coordinates and a time. 400 hours. Old habits die hard, she went. The coordinates led her to an abandoned hangar outside the base, one the teams had used for black ops training years ago. The air inside smelled of dust and oil. Shadows stretched long across the concrete. She heard the scrape of boots before she saw him. Didn't think you'd come, Wilkes said, stepping from the dark. You sent it, she asked. He nodded. Couldn't risk a call. They're watching us. Us, she repeated. Yeah, you stirred something big. Hale wasn't working alone. The mission in Helmand, it was part of a covert contractor op, private funding, political leverage. Ray's wasn't just collateral, he was a witness. Her pulse quickened. So this goes higher. Much higher. Wilkes opened a weathered case on a crate. Inside were old mission files, decrypted fragments of satellite logs, payment records, the kind of data you don't collect unless you plan to disappear after. I spent months digging, he said. Couldn't tell you, not until you were ready. Ready for what? He looked up. To finish what we started. Anna's gaze moved over the documents, the grainy photos, the names blacked out. Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. You realize what this means, if we go public with this? They'll erase us, he finished. Yeah, but maybe that's what's needed. She stared at him for a long time. Then she picked up one of the photos, Ray's, smiling in the desert sun. He deserved better, she whispered. Wilkes nodded. We all did. Outside, dawn crept over the horizon, spilling pale light into the hangar. It hit the dust motes like sparks in the air. For a second, Anna thought of all the times she'd watched sunrise after a mission, exhausted, alive, wondering if any of it mattered. This time it did. She closed the case. All right, she said, let's do it. That day marked the start of something quiet and dangerous. They didn't call it an operation, but it felt like one: reconnaissance, infiltration, exposure. They used old networks, ex-Intel friends, encrypted drops, the kind of work that never officially existed. For Anna, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption, not for herself, but for every voice that had been silenced by convenience. But at night, when the noise stopped, doubt crept in. She'd sit by the window, watching the base lights flicker, asking herself the same question over and over. At what point does truth become another weapon? One night she wrote a note, just one line on a scrap of paper. If I disappear, it's because I've finally said enough. She folded it and left it under her mirror. The next morning, Wilkes didn't answer his phone. By afternoon, she was at his place, door unlocked, blinds drawn. Inside, coffee sat cold on the table. His jacket still hung by the door, but he was gone. No sign of struggle, no note. Just absence, the kind that hums louder than violence. She sat down slowly, scanning the room. His old mission files were gone. Only one thing remained on the counter, a sealed envelope with her name on it. Her throat tightened as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph, an aerial image of a compound, coordinates written in red ink, and beneath them a message. If I don't make it, finish it. The rest of the night she spent preparing, not with weapons, with memory. Every muscle, every movement, every reflex came back like muscle memory made of ghosts. Before dawn, she stood at the pier again. The ocean was calm, indifferent, endless. She breathed deeply. For the first time in years, she felt purpose again, heavy, dangerous, real. The war she'd tried to leave was calling her back. But this time, it wasn't for orders. It was for closure. The wind rose, carrying salt and silence. Somewhere out there, the truth waited, buried in sand, sealed by men who'd forgotten what honor meant. Anna Morgan hadn't. She turned toward the horizon and whispered, "You took everything from us. Now I'm coming for the rest." And with that, she disappeared into the dawn, a shadow returning to the only battlefield that ever made sense. It started with a single grainy image. A satellite shot of an anonymous compound, circled in red. Wilkes' final message. Anna had seen coordinates like those before, remote, inland, somewhere that didn't exist on maps that civilians saw. The kind of place used for testing, training, and forgetting. She memorized the numbers, burned them into her mind, then fed them into a secure military map overlay. The system blinked twice, then resolved into desert terrain. Old airfield, no-name facility, decommissioned officially. Unofficially, perfect for ghosts. She packed light, A small rucksack, burner phone, and her service knife, the same blade she'd carried through Helmand. Not for killing, but for remembering. A reminder that survival was earned, not given. Before leaving, she stood by the mirror one last time. The note she'd written, "If I disappear, it's because I finally said enough," stared back at her. She smiled faintly. "Guess I meant it." By nightfall, she was driving east across the California desert. The radio stayed silent, replaced by the hum of tires and the rhythmic thud of her heartbeat. The road stretched endless black ribbon over nothing. Every few miles, headlights appeared in the distance, trucks, patrols, life moving on without her. She envied that. Somewhere past midnight, she pulled over, climbed onto the hood of her car, and looked at the stars. The desert sky was clean, brutal, honest. The same sky she'd stared at on missions halfway across the world. No rank, no politics, just distance. She spoke aloud, softly, to the silence. "Wilkes, if you're out there, give me something. A sign, anything." The wind answered, whispering through the sagebrush. She closed her eyes. The voice in her head, the one trained to assess threats, began to catalog possibilities. Captured, compromised, silenced. But her heart whispered something else. Not yet. By dawn, she reached the edge of the restricted zone. A faded sign leaned half-buried in sand. U.S. government property, no trespassing. She parked a mile away, covered the vehicle with a tarp, and continued on foot. The facility appeared like a mirage, low, concrete, windowless, half-buried in the dunes, abandoned at first glance. But Anna had spent her life reading the subtle language of terrain, disturbed sand, tire imprints, airflow distortion over vents. Someone was still here. She moved closer, every step silent, deliberate. Her training unfolded naturally, heartbeat slowing, breath syncing with movement. The desert was alive with sound, wind, insects, metal expanding in the sun. All she had to do was disappear among it. At the outer fence, she found a breach recent, cut from the inside. Her pulse quickened. Wilkes. She slipped through, staying low, following the shadow line along the perimeter. Then she saw it faint near the entrance, a smear of dried blood, a boot print half erased by wind. Military issue, size 12, Wilkes. He'd made it this far. She reached the main door, steel, sealed electronically. The keypad was dark, but the hinge bolts were old. She pulled a small screwdriver from her pack and began to work in silence, muscle memory guiding her fingers. Within minutes, the door gave with a soft click. Inside, the air was stale, dust, oil, something metallic beneath it. A corridor stretched ahead, lined with dark rooms. She flicked her small penlight on, its beam slicing through the gloom. The walls bore no insignia, no unit markings, just numbers. She passed through them one by one, 3A, 3B, 4A, until she reached. The door was ajar. Inside lay Wilkes' field jacket, folded neatly on a cot. On the table beside it, a file folder half open. She moved closer. Inside were printouts, logs, coordinates, contractor lists. The same private security firm name repeated across multiple pages, Triarch Global Defense. Anna froze. Triarch, one of the shadow companies that had supplied weapons and intel for off-the-books missions during the war. The kind of company that vanished behind NDAs and political donations. And here it was, tied to Reyes' death, to Hale's cover-up, to this ghost facility. Her throat tightened. Wilkes had found the trail and someone had found him. A faint noise snapped her out of thought, metal on metal, echoing down the corridor. She killed the light instantly. Listened, footsteps, 2, maybe 3, trained, moving slow. She crouched behind the cot, hand on her knife. The voices grew closer, muffled male. "She'll come," Wilkes told her before he broke. "Doesn't matter now, we clear it, we burn it." Her jaw tightened before he broke. Something cold spread through her chest. They'd tortured him. The thought hit harder than fear, harder than grief. A hot, focused clarity flooded her veins, not anger, not revenge, just purpose. As the men entered the room, Anna struck like the memory of lightning. One silent step, one sharp motion, the knife met flesh, controlled, precise. She caught the body, lowered it soundlessly. The second man spun, weapon half raised, but she was already inside his reach. 2 moves. Joint lock choked down. He collapsed without a sound. Silence returned. The desert wind hummed through broken vents. Anna stood over the bodies, breathing slow. Her hands didn't tremble. They never did in moments like this. She searched them, radios, IDs, weapons. One badge bore the Triarch logo, another had a photograph. She froze again. Wilkes. Dead eyes starring from an evidence tag. Her breath caught. She pressed a hand over her mouth, fighting the wave rising inside her. Not here, not now. She closed her eyes, whispering his name. Then she saw it taped beneath the table, hidden by dust, a small envelope, her name again. Anna. She tore it free, unfolded it with shaking hands. If you're reading this, they got me. Don't waste time on revenge. Finish the job, expose them. Tell Ray's brother the truth. I'll find peace knowing you live to see it. Wilkes. Tears blurred her vision for the first time in years. She wiped them away roughly. You stupid old man, she whispered. You never knew how to quit. She gathered everything, the files, the badge, the note, and moved quickly. The men she'd taken down wouldn't be missed long. There, be more soon. By sunset, she was back on the highway, the compound shrinking in the rearview mirror like a bad memory refusing to fade. That night, she pulled into a roadside motel, flicked on the old TV, and sat on the edge of the bed with the files spread before her. Triarch's network spanned continents, arms deals, private wars, political payoffs. Every arrow led upward, and near the top was a name she hadn't seen in years. Commander Hale, retired. Senior Advisor, Triarch Global Defense. Her pulse slowed to a dangerous calm. It had never ended. Helmand wasn't a mistake, it was business. And Ray's, Wilkes, all of them, were collateral profit. She looked at Wilkes' note again, her thumb brushing over his last words. Tell Ray's brother the truth. Outside, the neon sign buzzed weakly. She thought of Dan Ray's, the anger in his eyes when they'd met. He deserved more than another funeral. She packed the files, slipped the knife back into her boot, and sat for a long time in silence. Then she whispered the only promise she could keep. I'll finish it, Wilkes, I swear. The TV flickered, an old war documentary, images of soldiers running through dust, voices narrating honor, sacrifice, courage, words that sounded empty now. She turned it off. The room fell into darkness. Somewhere far away, the first helicopter of morning thundered across the sky. She listened to it fade, heartbeat sinking with the echo. Tomorrow she'd start the war again. Not the one with bullets. The one with truth. How do you stand when the whole world wants you to kneel? Anna learned early that truth tasted like metal, sharp and cold, and when you held it, people flinched. She carried Wilkes' files like a lit cigarette, dangerous, hot, impossible to hide for long. The morning after she promised Ray's brother, she drove inland to a small town where Dan Ray's kept his life stitched together with the stubbornness of someone who refused to be broken. He saw her before she knocked. He'd been waiting, watching, eyes red-rimmed from too many nights staring at the walls. You look like hell, he said, but the greeting was warm, raw. You look like a man who needs the truth, she answered. She put the files on his kitchen table. The paper whispered between them like a living thing. Dan picked up a sheet with hands that trembled but did not falter. He read. He read again. The color drained from his face in slow shudders. I should have known, he said finally. They made it sound like we were lucky casualties. Anna kept her voice low. You weren't collateral, you were a witness. What did they want? His jaw worked. Why Miguel? She looked at him. Because he saw something. Because he could identify people who shouldn't exist on a battlefield. The room's silence swelled. Outside, a dog barked and a child shouted. Inside, the files mapped out a system that smelled like blood and money. Triarch's shell companies, offshore accounts, the invoices disguised as logistics, the memos ordering silence. It wasn't a mistake. It was a ledger. Dan's hands curled into fists. "They'll come after us," he said. "They already did," Anna replied. They didn't wait for the worst to arrive. They moved. Anna taught Dan how to erase a digital trail, how to move cash through safe channels, how to sit in a room and appear ordinary while listening for the wrong tone in a voice. He learned fast, fueled by grief and a new purpose. His eagerness surprised her and reminded her, painfully, of the boy who'd once run into a compound without understanding why he couldn't stop. Their first move was small, surgical, a leak. Not to tabloids that ate headlines for breakfast, but to an independent investigative journalist Anna had met once, a reporter who'd never bent to power. He wasn't starched or famous. He was stubborn and hungry, which made him dangerous to the sorts who liked tidy narratives. Anna dropped a packet on his desk and walked away before the ink could dry. The piece hit the feed like a thrown stone. It wasn't the full mountain, not yet, but it was a crack. Unmarked contractors tied to questionable extracts. Comments exploded. People demanded answers. A senator asked for hearings. The Navy issued a statement assuring the public it would review the allegations. Review take time. Time meant danger. Within 48 hours, Anna knew she'd been flagged. A black SUV cut her off outside a gas station. Two men in suits watched her from across the street. An encrypted channel she'd checked every morning went dark. Someone had lit a beacon on her head and the predators were circling. She stopped sleeping in one place. She taught Dan to move, to live with one bag, to hold a story tight and close. Trust was a currency they spent carefully. Allies arrived like ghosts, old teammates who owed favors and knew how to be invisible. A former intel analyst forwarded intercepted calls. A lockpicker with a soft voice taught Dan how to change a house's locks without leaving prints. Each one added a thread to a fragile net. But the net trembled. Triarch pushed back. Small things first. A threatening message painted on the side of Dan's truck. A break-in where nothing was stolen but a file jittered across the floor as if someone had searched for a single page and left. Then men in suits began to move with military precision, tailing Anna at night, probing her friends, asking questions that smelled like probes for weakness. One evening, while she lay low in a safe house, Anna watched the street below through a slit in the curtain and felt the old sensation creep up, the one that had haunted every firefight. Sound compression, tunnel vision. When you learn to watch for danger your whole life, danger becomes a kind of presence you greet like an old enemy. A car slowed. Two men stepped out. They didn't bother to hide their badges because they didn't need to. "Ms. Morgan," one said. He wore a tie too perfect for the heat. Anna let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "You got the wrong woman," she said, and let the lie live for a heartbeat. "We're with oversight," the other said. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about classified data." The phrase was honey. It was also a noose. She said nothing. Her silence did the work she used to let weapons do. The men watched her like surgeons. Someone had told them she was dangerous. No one had said why. In the end, they left with a bland warning and a file folder of empty hands. Triarch wanted her scared. The government wanted her quiet. Anna felt the walls thicken like ice. At night she talked with Dan until city lights bled blue on their faces and exhaustion made them honest. He asked impossible questions. "Will this change anything?" he'd say, and Anna would look at him across the cheap motel table and see Miguel in his eyes. "It already has," she'd reply. "It's just not over." Inside her, the quiet had shifted. Where there used to be only mission memory and regret, now there was grit anchored to a bigger truth. She traded the calm of doing nothing for the chaos of exposing rot. The moral ledger felt heavier, a line she would not cross: expose liars, protect the innocent, never forget the fallen. But morality under pressure sometimes lopped off the corners you thought sharp. She'd sleep poorly, but sleep she would. Their next move had to be public, impossible to ignore. They planned a sting not to kill men in suits, but to pin a document to someone who couldn't deny it. Anna had an old contact, a tech who could spoof a corporate server long enough to plan a file that tipped an audit into a cascade. If the auditors chased the tail to Triarch, London Shell, the press would follow. It was messy, risky, gloriously exposed. On a rainy night they set the trap. Dan watched from a car across the road while Anna slipped into an old Triarch pipeline disguised as a contractor. She walked through compounds like this before. Now she moved like a ghost in daylight. Wet shoes, wet jacket, ID that said nothing important. Her hands were steady, but underneath her sternum something hummed like a bee's nest. Inside she found what she expected and far more. Servers humming like insects. A man at a desk with a headset who looked up and smiled, unsuspecting, because he didn't know the war he fed was real. Anna slid into a shadow and worked. Fingers on a keyboard, false credentials, a file named Act Review Final, PDF dropped into history. It took 10 minutes. 10 minutes of feeling like a thief and a soldier and someone finally speaking in the language of consequence. She left with a copy burned to 2 drives, one for Dan, one to be released if she disappeared. The plan was delicate as glass. By morning, the auditors called. By noon, London had a problem that could not be ignored. The paper trail blossomed across channels, and a week of hearings followed, not the tidy epilogues they wanted, but the messy public airing that exposed contractors and their hand-holders. Triarch felt the burn. Their stock dipped. Their executives issued bland statements. Hale took a leave for personal reasons. The Navy announced an independent review and appointed committees with faces that smiled for cameras. Victory, however, had a sour edge. The hearings exposed more than one could have planned. Contractors who'd been off the books, senators with blind spots, captains who'd sacrificed a team for advantage. The world loved to watch its institutions correct themselves on television. It felt righteous. It felt slow. The hit back was sharp. Anna's face was on camera, identified in passing as a former operator. Triarch's lawyers painted her as unstable. Conservative outlets questioned her motives. A smear campaign bloomed like a wound. Dan's neighbors pulled their yard chairs in tighter. His employer restructured his schedule until he was let go. The nightmarish efficiency of institutional retaliation felt both petty and lethal. When the threats escalated, a bullet through Dan's mailbox, a careless car that tried to run them off the road, the world seemed to compress into an axis of fear and resolve. Anna felt the old comfort of single-point focus. She could plan raids, coordinate extraction, improvise escape, but the costs were no longer abstract. The targets were real. A brother whose life she'd offered truth to, an old friend whose funeral was a last promise, herself, the woman who'd once been proud enough to believe that honesty lived in a white file. In a motel bathroom one night, she stared at her bruised reflection and whispered to the woman in the glass, "You wanted truth, now you have it." Her own voice sounded like someone else. Dan took the hardest hits. He lost his job, his landlord raised the rent as if they'd never been in the same room, and people who once nodded in sympathy now avoided eye contact. He would not quit. Anna watched him sleep one night and felt a small, fierce protectiveness swell between her ribs. She'd promised Ray's his brother. She would keep it. Then the blow came she hadn't expected. Someone that Anna trusted vanished from the world. A hacker she'd worked with stopped answering. Then his apartment went silent and the phones died one by one. It changed the math. The stakes weren't just political, they were mortal. Anna sat on the motel bed and mapped scenarios like a chess player. Moves, countermoves, sacrifices. She called 2 old operators and asked for a favor she hadn't asked for in years, cover to move Dan, safe houses, a voice on a secure line. They answered without hesitation. Allies mattered. When morning came, Anna drove Dan to a small safe house on the other side of the state, a place with no cameras and fewer questions. They packed the rest into one duffel bag each. As they left, Dan took her hand. For the first time since Miguel died, his grip was steady and unafraid. "You sure about this?" he asked. She met his eyes. "I'm sure about you." They drove into a sky washed in light. On the radio, a news anchor spoke about hearings and investigations. The world talked loudly as if any of it could drown the truth. Anna watched the road tighten ahead and felt the responsibility weigh like an ocean in her chest. The battle was no longer an operation. It was a claim on what remained of their honor. Behind them, the country hummed along, indifferent and loud. Ahead, the path narrowed. She didn't know if they would win. She only knew they would not kneel. And as the hills swallowed the highway, Anna felt the quiet resolve settle like armor. If the world wanted to break, she'd be a blade that would not bend. The hunt had begun in earnest. How long can a soldier stay ready before breaking? Anna didn't know anymore. Days bled into nights, one safe house into another. Every time she closed her eyes, she dreamed of open doors and silent footsteps. Every time she woke, her hand reached for a weapon that wasn't there. The war she'd left had followed her home, wearing a new uniform: bureaucracy, fear, silence. Dan tried to keep the world normal. He cooked breakfast on a rusted stove, kept the news muted, fixed a leaky pipe in the safe house as if domestic chores could hold reality together. He never said it aloud, but she could see it, the edge of fatigue behind his eyes, the quiet terror of a civilian dragged too far into her world. "You ever think of just walking away?" he asked one night. Anna looked at him across the flickering light of a single candle. "Walking where?" "Anywhere that isn't this," he said softly. "You've done enough." She wanted to believe that, but Wilkes' note still sat in her pack, its edges worn soft from being unfolded too many times. Finish it, he'd written, expose them. She couldn't stop halfway, not after the lives it had cost. "There's no enough when the people who caused this are still out there," she said finally. "I can't just run." Dan nodded. "Then I won't either." That simple vow tightened something in her chest, not fear, not pride, but a small ache of gratitude. She wasn't used to being followed into danger willingly. They moved again 3 nights later. The safe house had been compromised, a drone pass overhead, too slow, too deliberate to be random. Anna saw its reflection in the window, a faint red blink against the dark. She grabbed their bags and said one word: "Now." They left through the back, walking through waist-high grass toward the tree line. The night air was cold enough to bite. Behind them, the house glowed faintly in moonlight. 2 hours later, when the explosion came, they were already miles away. Dan didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "They really want you gone." Anna's voice was calm, but her heart hammered. "They want the silence back." By dawn, they reached a small mountain town, the kind that slept through history. No one asked questions there. Anna rented a cabin under a false name, paid in cash, and bought food at a local store where the clerk never made eye contact. The kind of anonymity you could live inside if you didn't breathe too loudly. For the first time in months, the quiet felt clean. The trees outside moved with the wind like slow waves. She thought maybe, just maybe, they could wait this out, let the storm burn itself down. But quiet never lasted long for people like her. The message came through a back channel she hadn't used in years, a string of encrypted numbers from an old SEAL contact, Cole. He'd been on operations with her once, before the world blurred into moral gray. The message was short. "You were right, Triarch Cleaning House. Hail moving assets offshore. Final transfer in 72 hours. DC to Zurich. You want him, it's now." Anna stared at the screen for a long time. Then she sent a reply: "Send location." The coordinates came back: Washington Dulles, private hangar sector. Departure time redacted, but she didn't need it. She could smell the timeline in those few words. They were shipping out, escaping the fallout before the system realized it had been played. She closed the laptop. Dan watched her from the doorway. "You got that look again," he said. "What look?" "The one you get before everything goes to hell." She almost smiled. Maybe this time it goes somewhere else. He stepped closer. "You're going after him, aren't you?" "I have to," she said quietly. "If Hale disappears, so does the truth. Wilkes died for it, Miguel too. I won't let them fade." Dan shook his head. "You can't go alone." "I won't ask you to come." "I'm not asking permission," he said. There was no argument after that. They packed at dusk, light, efficient. Old habits came back like instincts that had been waiting to be used again. Anna checked the map, the fuel, the weapons. Each motion was deliberate, ritualistic. She wasn't chasing vengeance. She was following duty to its final coordinates. On the road east, the miles passed in silence broken only by static radio stations and the occasional truck roaring past. Dan dozed, his head resting against the window, while Anna drove. The sky bruised purple and gold as they crossed state lines, the sun setting behind them like a memory she didn't have time to remember. Somewhere outside Kansas, he woke. "How do you do it?" he asked. "Do what?" "Stay calm, like none of this scares you." She thought for a moment. Because fear's just noise until it matters. You learn to let it pass through you. "And if it does?" "Then you move anyway." He nodded slowly. "You talk like someone who already died once." She glanced at him. "Maybe I did." They reached D.C. a day later, moving under gray skis and drizzle. The city looked the same as always, clean suits, dirty deals, and people too busy to see what was crumbling underneath. Anna parked 3 blocks from the airport perimeter. From here on, everything had to be quiet. Through a gap in the fence line, they watched the private sector lights flicker. A convoy of black sedans waited by the hangars. Men in dark coats carried briefcases toward a sleek jet whose tail bore no markings. Hale's escape. Anna checked her watch. 10 minutes, she murmured. Dan exhaled slowly. "What's the plan?" "Expose him before he leaves the ground," she said. "Triarch's got half the government in its pocket. Once he's airborne, he's untouchable." She handed him a small drive, the last backup of Wilkes' data. "If I don't come back, get this to the reporter. You know where to find him." Dan stared at the drive like it was a live grenade. "Don't talk like that." "I'm not planning to die," she said. "I just plan for everything." They moved fast and low along the perimeter. Anna's breath slowed. Time began to stretch the way it always did when everything mattered. Every sound magnified. The hum of engines, the thud of boots, the distant rumble of departing planes. At the hangar gate, she saw him, Hale. Older, heavier, but unmistakable. The same man who'd ordered her to leave Ray's behind. The same man who'd smiled during the tribunal. His calm expression flickered as he turned to glance at a monitor. Anna stepped out of the shadow. "Hale." He froze. For a second, disbelief replaced control. "Morgan." Her voice was steady. "You always liked clean exits." He recovered quickly, hands spreading slightly. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you." Behind her, Dan stayed in cover, ready to run if needed. Anna's eyes never left Hale. Years of fury and restraint compressed into that single stillness. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "There are things bigger than both of us." "No," she replied softly. "There are things we're supposed to protect, and you forgot that." He took a step closer, trying to reclaim authority. "You think this changes anything. People like us, we're tools, replaceable. The machine doesn't care about guilt." Anna smiled, small, sad. "Maybe not, but it still bleeds when you cut the right wire." From her pocket, she pulled a small device, a transmitter linked to the journalist's feed. The moment she pressed it, every word in this hangar would go live to thousands of screens. Hale's eyes widened. "Don't." "Already did." A light blinked on the transmitter, red, steady. She didn't need to say anything more. The files had been sent, the recording was live, and Hale's empire began to unravel in real time. He lunged, desperate, but Anna moved first. Years of discipline turned motion into inevitability. She sidestepped, swept his arm aside, and pinned him against the side of the jet, her forearm pressed to his throat. "You lied to men who trusted you," she whispered. "You left them to die." He choked out, "We were ordered. You were paid." For a heartbeat, she saw everything raise his blood, Wilkes' grin, the desert, the silence. Then she released him. He stumbled, gasping, the weight of exposure heavier than her grip. Outside, sirens wailed. Security swarmed. It didn't matter. The truth was already airborne. Anna stepped back into the shadow, motioning for Dan. They slipped away into the rain, unseen as the chaos began. Hours later, headlines filled every screen. Whistleblower leak reveals corruption at defense contractor. Former commander implicated in SEAL cover-up. The truth had landed. The machine was bleeding. In the motel where they hid, Dan watched the news in silence. "You did it," he said. Anna stood by the window, rain streaking down the glass. "We did it," she corrected. Then softer, "But there's always a cost." He turned. "What kind of cost?" She didn't answer. Outside, the rain turned to mist, soft against the neon glow. Anna closed her eyes and let the exhaustion finally reach her bones. The ghosts were quieter tonight, not gone, but further away. Tomorrow the world would move on. But tonight, for the first time in years, she let herself breathe. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It washed over the city, rinsing headlines off sidewalks, carrying the noise away. Inside a small apartment on the edge of Arlington, Anna watched the storm blur the skyline into shades of gray. The news had already moved on. New crises, new villains. Justice came fast, then faded faster. Commander Hale had been arrested, then quietly transferred. Triarch Global dissolved under restructuring. A few mid-level executives took the fall. Committees promised reform, cameras flashed, senators spoke of accountability. And just like that, silence returned. For the world, the story was over. For Anna, it had only changed shape. She stood by the window with a cup of coffee gone cold, listening to the hum of traffic below. Dan Reyes was safe, relocated under a new identity. The journalist had vanished into the circuits of his own profession, guarding sources with his life. Everyone had survived except the part of her that knew how to rest. Sometimes she caught her reflection in the glass and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her hair shorter now, her eyes older. She looked less like a soldier and more like someone still waiting for a fight that might never come. She turned on the TV. Another war, another headline. She turned it off again. Silence. That's when the knock came. She reached instinctively for the small pistol beneath the table, then stopped when she heard the voice. "It's open," she called. The door creaked and an old figure stepped in. Commander Jansen. His uniform gone, his walk slower, but the eyes still clear. "Thought you disappeared," he said. "Guess I'm still bad at that," she answered. He set his hat on the table, looked around the bare apartment. "You always travel light." "Easier to leave," she said. He studied her for a long moment. "You did the right thing, Anna." She smiled faintly. "Funny, doesn't feel that way." "It never does," he said. "But people will remember. Maybe not your name, maybe not the details, but they'll remember that someone stood up." She looked out the window again. "And when they forget." He followed her gaze. "Then someone else stands up. That's how it works." He left soon after, his presence fading like an echo. When the door closed, the apartment felt heavier, quieter. That night she walked the streets until the city thinned into the Potomac's edge. The river moved like dark glass under the bridge lights. She leaned against the railing and let the wind sting her face. The bruise from that night in the bar had long faded, but she could still feel it, the moment everything began, the strike, the silence after. Funny how a single moment can become a fault line in your life. She remembered the bar's heat, the smell of cheap beer and salt. Rico's face before understanding replaced arrogance. Jansen's salute, Wilkes' grin, Miguel Rey's laughing in the dust. All of it folded together, fragments of a life built on noise and finished in whispers. A voice startled her from behind. "You really are a ghost." Dan Reyes. He stepped from the shadows, hands in his jacket pockets. His hair was longer now, his eyes softer but still marked by the things they'd seen. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I had to see you before I disappear for real." He leaned on the railing beside her, watching the water. "The files you gave the journalist, they started something bigger. Veterans talking, families asking questions. It's not gone, Anna. It's just slower than we want." She nodded. "Slow is fine as long as it moves." They stood there a while, the river murmuring below them. Dan said quietly, "I still have Miguel's watch." She turned. "You kept it." "Never worked again after Helmand, still ticks sometimes, like it remembers." She smiled. "Maybe it does." He looked at her. "What about you? What now?" She hesitated, then said, "I'm thinking of disappearing somewhere the sea still smells like home. Maybe Coronado." He chuckled. "Back where it all started. Back where I stopped pretending I was small." He placed the watch in her hand. "Then take it. Feels like it belongs to you now." The metal was cold against her palm. She closed her fingers around it gently. "He'd hate that," she said. "Maybe," Dan replied, "but he'd understand." They said goodbye without ceremony, just two people on a bridge bound by the same silence. When he walked away, she watched until his figure disappeared into the mist. Then she opened her hand and stared at the watch face, its cracked glass glinting faintly. The second hand moved once, then stopped. She slipped it into her pocket and started walking. The next morning she was gone. Weeks passed. Somewhere on the California coast, a woman rented a small house overlooking the ocean. Locals said she was quiet, polite, always awake before dawn. They saw her running along the cliffs each morning, moving with the steady rhythm of someone still counting breaths between heartbeats. She told no stories. She asked no favors. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast from the west. The sky darkened, waves roaring against the rocks. Fishermen pulled in their boats early, but the woman stayed on the beach, rain soaking her hair, eyes fixed on the horizon as if waiting for an answer that only the sea could give. When it finally came, it wasn't words, just understanding. She'd carried truth like a burden, and now she realized it had never belonged to her alone. Justice wasn't a medal or a verdict. It was the space you cleared so someone else could breathe easier. She thought of Wilkes, of Reyes, of every nameless soldier who'd fought for ideals bigger than themselves. She thought of Jansen's salute, and for the first time she didn't feel the weight, she felt the lineage. That night she sat by the window with a notebook open on her lap. The pages were empty, except for the first line she'd written. "There's power in silence." She wrote slowly, like she was learning language again. She didn't write about war or politics or revenge. She wrote about people, about what it meant to stand still while the world shouted, about the quiet strength in not answering cruelty with more of it. When she finished, she closed the notebook and whispered, "For them." The wind outside carried her voice out to the sea. Months later, in a bar near Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, a young recruit sat alone at a corner table. The same stool, the same scarred wood, a new generation. Above it hung a small brass plaque polished by countless curious hands. The professional seat. The recruit asked the bartender, "What's that about?" The bartender smiled. "Story goes, years ago a guy picked a fight with a woman right there. Didn't end well for him. Turns out she was a SEAL, taught the room a lesson about respect." The recruit grinned. "True story." The bartender shrugged. "Around here, true doesn't matter. What matters is what it reminds you of." He left the plaque shining under the low light. its edges catching the gold of the sunset through the window. Outside on the cliffs above the base, a lone figure watched the horizon. She wore plain clothes, her hair swept back by the wind. The ocean below rolled endlessly, patient and unjudging. She raised her hand in a quiet salute, not to anyone in particular, but to the memory that lived in every wave, every whisper of wind that had ever carried a name. Then she turned and walked away, leaving only footprints in the sand that the tide would soon erase. Because that's how legends end, not with thunder but with stillness. Not with victory parades but with peace. And somewhere in the fading light, a voice, calm, steady, almost like hers, seemed to say, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts."